In the words of Nietzsche, whatever is shaky should be pushed over. Something is shaky. On a shaky foundation, his advice is to push it over. If it's not on a shaky foundation, then when you push, it'll stay there and it'll be okay. But it's on a shaky foundation, push it over. It's hard if one wants to place simple moral blame upon a body of text to go, well, Nietzsche was responsible for fascism, and damn it, now he's responsible for its opposite number, anarchism. Why wasn't he just a damn good liberal like John Stuart Mill? Well, he thought Mill was a blockhead, you know? I mean, why wasn't he just a middle-of-the-roader? I mean, you know, that's the politics that seems to dominate the current period, sort of middle-of-the-roader mainstream. Well, to quote my friend Hightower from Texas, there's nothing in the middle of the road where I come from except yellow lines and squashed armadillos. What shapes discursive practices and actual human practices are certain relations of power which create the conditions for the possibility of certain sentences being written and certain practices being carried out. The reason that for Nietzsche power can't be simply the power of one person over another, it can't be that simple, is because selves aren't that simple. And also because power is not just, as it were, horizontally applied in models that we might think of like the Marxist theory of exploitation. In some sense, we internalize relations of power within ourselves that allow many of the external relations to function. Now, to give a West Texas example of that is that each one of us has to have a little cop inside us, a little tiny policeman inside, that keeps us from stealing because there aren't enough cops on the outside to keep us from doing it. Something that you bring against yourself and against your own self-project in a way that's been characterized by certain French theorists as micrological power or sets and effects of power rather than macrological power. So if I talk to you about the police or the state or even in Marx's sense of the power of the marketplace, these are macrological views of power, and Nietzsche provides us with a micrological view. And that micrological view has to do with tiny intersees of overlapping effects, very difficult to characterize, very subtle effects of power, almost unnoticeable. In fact, they sometimes pass not for power at all, but rather for things like a good conscience, clear mind, or fair rules, or even fairness itself. Well, let's take, for example, a university setting. Argument within that setting seems to proceed free of power. If Nietzsche is right about power, wherever there is knowledge, it will be an effect of power. That will not mean it's not knowledge, folks. Now, in the case of the university, the institutional powers are quite subtle. In other words, it's very rare that, especially at a university, and this is more common in high school, where you can simply take unruly students and throw them out into the streets. In university, you don't get that opportunity quite so often, that thrilling opportunity to just take a student you don't like and say, get the hell out of here, don't come back. But there are other ways, and they may seem childish, but sometimes power is childish. There are other ways to discipline. One of my favorite is grading. And it starts very early in our lives. Our first system is highly complex and if you want an account of structuralism, this is an interesting one. In kindergarten, the way we sort of discipline our kids is they do their rows, and it's really red, and they stay in the lines, they get a happy face. If it gets a little out of the lines, they just get a sort of straight face. They really just draw all over the thing in chaotic Nietzschean wildness. They get a sad face, If they don't turn in the work at all, they don't get a face. No face. And I noticed that as you go out throughout school, that this same topography of discipline continues. In elite universities, we still go A, and the fact that we've substituted a letter for that happy face doesn't mean the message is different. In other words, they've been socialization. Power has already instructed them that that A is a happy face. And you get an A and you see a happy face. A, happy face. B, and guess what you get? C. And if you, for God's sakes, in an elite university, if you flunk somebody, you won't see their face. You may get a letter from their attorney, but you won't see their face. Okay? My point here is that the structural, disciplinary way that that's done, believe me, if you're grading in the humanities, the difference between a brilliant paper on Plato and one that's completely insane is not an easy distinction. If you think it is, you don't teach that. I mean, I admit that in math courses, there we can let a sort of traditional view hold sway for a moment, but when you're grading a paper on Plato, for God's sakes, or Shakespeare or Proust, it's hard to know the difference between a brilliant insight and a piece of garbled lunacy. It looks as though my power to give that grade is my power. But what happens if I decide I'm not going to play that game anymore and I'm going to just give all my students A's that complete the work and otherwise F's? I'm not going to do this gradation, this topography anymore. I can't. I've tested that one empirically. They won't let me do it. No, you have to have a spread. Now, here's the interesting thing about power today. They don't tell you what the spread is exactly, because macrologically, they're disappointed that you haven't been, as it were, already conditioned to know that. So they're sort of disappointed in you that you didn't realize all along that you needed that spread. Just like if you opened a Macy's that you happen to be the manager of and didn't get that camera installed, your supervisor would go, well, I thought you knew we always use cameras. You were a pretty nice fella, but we always use them. We don't want to interfere with our customers, no. But we always use these cameras. It's for the good of the rest of the customers. Because if there's a lot of shoplifting, the prices will go up. These are situations within which power and knowledge and principle are intermingled. For example, when I earlier said there was, paradoxically, Nietzsche argues there's an immoral origin to morality. Paradoxically, there is rational knowledge itself has its origins in relations of power, which themselves, in my view, cannot be rationally defended. Grading is one example. Grading is just one example. It's one of my favorites, though, because it's one of the times in life when you see what an incredible effect you can have by making a happy face. You can make someone happy by just... Now, someone's bound to say, well, of course you do, because those grades depend upon what they do later in life in their jobs. Well, that just feeds back into my earlier argument, of course, because the rest of your whole stinking life, you're going to be looking from a happy face from someone, 8 years in the law firm, and you're looking at all the old lawyers that forgot all the law they ever knew 20 years ago, and you're waiting for one of those SOWs or whatever to give you another happy face. Well, the challenge of Nietzsche, the sort of left Nietzsche that I want to evoke, is to at least be aware of these interstices of power, to at least be aware of them, and to be willing to challenge their boundaries. Because it is not a pretty life to always be in search of a happy face, and it is not for your own good. For God's sakes, remember when my father used to spank me, and the first thing he would tell me is the same thing they'd tell me at school. I'm going to do this for your own good. And I always wanted to say, well, damn it, why don't you spank yourself then? Because you can spare me the favor. If it's for good, do it to you. I love you, Dad. And if it's for good, do it to yourself, because we want you to have the good. Don't do it for my own good. Don't do me any favors here. Oh, well, we don't think you'll work out with our firm. It's for your own good. Oh, well, thanks anyway. But I'll sacrifice for you. Modern power presents itself as what I would like to call, and I mean this especially where it's least obvious. We know what modern power has looked like in the East Bloc and in the Soviet Union, and it was no surprise to anyone. They were totalitarians. What I would like for us to recognize is that we are totalitarians as well. Easy to find the mote in your brother's eye, difficult to see the one in your own. Very difficult. So this account of power reminds us that the totalitarian is not the other. Sometimes we meet the enemy and it's us.